when my biological mother pushed through the double doors of the law firm in her $2,000 designer dress. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at the oak conference table where a multi-million-dollar estate was waiting to be handed over. 15 years ago, she and my father threw me out on the street with nothing but a trash bag of hand-me-downs because I didn't fit into their picture-perfect family. For 15 years, I was dead to her, until my wealthy Uncle Arthur passed away without a direct heir. She strutted into that room smug, holding an outdated family tree, convinced she was about to inherit his fortune, real estate empire, and offshore accounts. What she didn't know was that Uncle Arthur hadn't forgotten the night they abandoned me, and the secret stipulation in his final will was about to destroy her life. My name is Clara Sterling, and I'm 28 years old. Looking back, the rain on the night I turned 13 didn't feel like weather. It felt like a punishment. My biological parents stood on the porch of our pristine suburban home, my mother holding a black trash bag packed with a few hand-me-downs, and my father holding the front door wide open. To them, image was everything. My older brother was the golden child, destined for Ivy League royalty, and I was the awkward, quiet girl who didn't fit into their high society life. When a trivial rumor at school threatened my father's precious reputation, they didn't defend me. They discarded me. "You're a liability, Clara," my mother whispered, her eyes completely devoid of warmth as she tossed the bag onto the wet driveway. They locked the door, leaving a 13-year-old girl standing in the dark with nowhere to go. I thought my life was over that night, shivering on the cold pavement. But then a pair of headlights cut through the torrential rain. It was my estranged Uncle Arthur, my father's older brother, who had cut ties with the family years ago because of their cold, transactional nature. He pulled up, stepped out into the storm without an umbrella, and wrapped his coat around my shoulders. "They don't know what they just threw away, kiddo," he told me softly, ushering me into his car. Uncle Arthur took me in, raised me, and gave me a real home, setting into motion a 15-year story of resilience that my parents never saw coming. For the next 15 years, my life was rebuilt from the ground up inside Uncle Arthur's warm, oak-paneled home. While my biological parents went around telling their high society friends that their daughter had been sent away to a prestigious overseas boarding school to cover up their embarrassment, I was actually sitting at the kitchen table every evening with Arthur. He wasn't just a guardian, he was a mentor. He owned a thriving commercial real estate firm, and instead of sheltering me, he taught me every angle of the business. By the time I turned 22, I knew how to analyze property deeds, negotiate complex leases, and spot financial deceit from a mile away. Meanwhile, my parents and my golden child brother continued living their lavish, hollow lifestyle, entirely unaware that Arthur was grooming me to be his successor. They hadn't reached out once. Not on my birthdays, not on holidays, not ever. But when news began to circulate among extended relatives that Uncle Arthur's health was declining in his late 70s, their radio silence suddenly shattered. My mother started sending vague, sweet-sounding emails to Arthur's firm, claiming she wished to reconnect before it was too late, and subtly inquiring about his lack of a direct heir. They thought he was a lonely, dying old man sitting on millions with no one to leave it to. If you've ever had family members magically reappear the second they smelled money in the air, drop a comment below and let me know, because what my parents were planning was pure greed. Uncle Arthur passed away quietly on a crisp Tuesday morning in October, holding my hand in his favorite room of the house. The grief hit me like a physical wave. He was the only person who had ever truly loved me, the man who had given me a second chance at life when my own parents tossed me aside like trash. For 2 days, I sat in silence, surrounded by his old books and the quiet, lingering presence of a man who had built an empire with integrity and heart. The reading of the will was scheduled for Friday afternoon at Standard Law offices downtown, specifically inside the high-rise executive boardroom of Vance and Associates. I arrived early, wearing a simple black suit, sitting quietly at the end of a long, polished oak table. The room was deathly quiet, save for the ticking clock on the wall and the soft rustle of papers as Arthur's lifelong attorney, Mr. Vance, organized his files. I wasn't there for the money. I was there to honor the man who had raised me. Then, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open without warning. The sharp click of designer high heels echoed off the marble floor as my biological mother strutted into the room, draped in a $2,000 designer coat, flanked by my father and my brother. They looked around the plush office with predatory eyes, completely ignoring me as if I were invisible, before pulling up chairs right at the center of the table. They were armed with their own high-powered corporate lawyer, convinced that as Arthur's closest living blood relatives, a multi-million-dollar inheritance was about to fall directly into their hands. My mother adjusted her diamond necklace, her eyes sweeping over the room until they finally landed on me sitting quietly at the end of the table. A cold, dismissive smirk spread across her face. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with that familiar patronizing condescension I hadn't heard in 15 years. "I see you're still hovering around Arthur's affairs. I suppose it's nice of you to pay your respects, but this is a private family matter now. Real legal decisions are about to be made." My father didn't even look me in the eye. He just adjusted his cufflinks and muttered to their lawyer about expediting the process so they could catch an evening flight. My brother leaned back in his chair, chuckling softly under his breath. "Mom's right, Clara. You were disowned over a decade ago. You have zero bloodline claim, no legal standing, and honestly, it's embarrassing that you're sitting at this table like you belong here." They treated me like an intruder, a disgraced former memory, completely convinced that their biological status guaranteed them Arthur's commercial real estate portfolio, his offshore accounts, and his residential properties. I didn't utter a single word. I just sat there, hands resting calmly on my lap, watching the three of them practically salivate over a dead man's fortune. Mr. Vance, Arthur's attorney, slowly closed his ledger, removed his gold-rimmed glasses, and looked at my parents over the top of the frames. The tension in the room thickened as he drew a heavy manila folder from his briefcase, signaling that the games were officially over. Mr. Vance cleared his throat, the sound sharp and echoing in the silent boardroom. "We are gathered here to execute the final will and testament of Arthur Sterling," he announced, opening the manila folder with deliberate precision. My mother leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished mahogany table, ready to hear her name called. "To begin," Mr. Vance read, "I, Arthur Sterling, leave the following statement regarding my brother, his wife, and their son. 15 years ago, you threw a 13-year-old child out onto the street in the dead of night to preserve your social standing. You abandoned your own daughter, Clara, demonstrating a total lack of empathy, character, and human decency. For 15 years, you treated her as non-existent, only resurfacing when you smelled the scent of my mortality and my wealth." My mother's face flushed a deep, ugly red. "This is outrageous," she snapped, turning to her lawyer. "We are his closest living blood relatives. He was an old, bitter man, and this language is completely unprofessional." Mr. Vance didn't even flinch. He raised a hand to silence her and turned to the next page. "Therefore, as outlined in the legal documents executed 6 years ago, I hereby confirm that I legally adopted Clara Sterling as my full daughter and sole heir upon her 18th birthday. Every asset, including Sterling commercial real estate, the residential properties, liquid bank accounts, and corporate voting rights, was transferred into the Clara Sterling Irrevocable Trust years ago. My biological brother and his family are explicitly left $0. The room went completely still as my mother's jaw dropped in absolute shock. My mother slammed her hands onto the table, her face contorted in rage. "This is a fix," she screamed, standing up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "He was mentally incompetent. You manipulated him, Clara. We will contest this will in every court in this state until you're left with nothing." Her hired lawyer shifted uncomfortably, eyeing the official adoption and trust documents on the table, clearly realizing they had no legal leg to stand on. Mr. Vance slowly turned another page in the file, his expression entirely unbothered. "Mrs. Sterling, I suggest you sit down and let me finish reading the final stipulation. Uncle Arthur anticipated your exact reaction." He cleared his throat and continued reading. Over the past 7 years, my brother and his wife accumulated over $850,000 in personal debts, defaulted mortgages, and failed business loans due to their lavish lifestyle. Through my holding company, I quietly purchased every single one of those outstanding debts and consolidated them under a single private note. Under Clause 12B of this agreement, if my brother or his wife attend this will reading and attempt to claim my estate, an immediate acceleration demand is triggered. Mr. Vance pushed a thick packet of financial notices across the table directly toward my mother. This notice demands full repayment of the $850,000 balance within 30 calendar days. Failure to pay will result in immediate foreclosure on your primary residence and liquidation of your personal assets. The color completely drained from my mother's face as she stared at the documents, realizing she hadn't just been cut out, she was financially destroyed. My mother dropped back into her chair, the arrogance completely draining from her eyes as tears of desperation welled up. She looked across the table at me, her hands trembling as she reached out. "Clara, please," she begged, her voice cracking in a way I had never heard before. "We're your family. We made a mistake all those years ago, but you can't do this to us. You have millions now, just forgive the debt. Please, save your mother." I looked at the woman who had thrown a 13-year-old girl into the rain without a second thought, the woman who had ignored me for 15 years until she thought there was money to be made. I felt no anger, no urge to scream, just a profound, quiet clarity. "You didn't care about family when you locked the door 15 years ago," I said softly, standing up from the oak table. "And you don't care about family now. You only care about yourself." I turned to the 2 security guards standing at the boardroom entrance and gave a simple nod. "Please escort them out of the building. They are trespassing." As my parents and brother were led away in disgrace, their quiet sobbing echoing down the hallway, I sat back down next to Mr. Vance. For the first time in 15 years, the weight on my shoulders vanished. I wasn't the discarded child in the rain anymore. I was Clara Sterling, the proud daughter of Arthur Sterling, ready to carry his legacy into the future with honor and strength. If you were in my shoes, would you have forgiven them or enforced the debt? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.